Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for joining this concluding session of IPC Masterclass. We are live now. So I see 87 participants joined already, and we have our chairperson, Dr. Rangareddy, and speaker, Dr. Shukanya here. Before we formally start, there is a request I would like to make here. I see that many of you are not able to read the email which I have sent. That's why today I have sent you an SMS to remind you so that you should not miss the session. The request is that email is getting delivered to many of your spam folder. So please go search this email by Ramdas in the spam folder, and there is an option to choose that this is not an spam. So you can indicate that a mail from Ramdas V is not an spam. Number two, what you can do, you can add IPC masterclass @ signmed.in into your email address book. If you do this edition of IPC masterclass at signmed.in in your email address book, then all the email going regarding the masterclass will be delivered in your inbox, and you will not miss any mail, including the video recording and many other things. With this, I'm seeing that it is about to be 100 now. To start, good time to start. We are very excited to have a very, very relevant topic today. So with this, over to Dr. Rangareddy, the President of Infection Control Academy of India, to start the session, please.
Colleagues, very good afternoon and very warm welcome to the fifth session of the series on outbreaks, epidemics, and pandemics. Today, we are going to have another very important and very practical session. Today, if I'm going to start the presentation. So the theme is known to you, all of you, that is outbreaks, epidemics, and pandemics. And you already know very well the objectives which has been set forward. Can you keep moving, Mr. Pranav? So the objectives which were set were actually to give the right kind of tools, update the knowledge, and also encourage the efforts to set up and institutionalize structured surveillance modalities so that we can all effectively deal with the outbreaks, epidemics, and pandemics. The last four sessions have given us a very thorough understanding. From the feedback what we have received from all of you, I understand that we have been able to move in the right direction in terms of giving and living those objectives which had been set forward by all the partnering organizations together. So session 1 and 2, as we have discussed, had been more of going back and revisiting the basics, and also understanding the natural history in epidemiology and linking that with the current pandemic. And the third session had been more of allaying the myths, misconceptions, and misrepresentations which usually happen during healthcare emergencies like epidemics, pandemics, and outbreaks. Fourth session had been actually more of modeling exercise and understanding what happens behind the scenes when we receive the models in relation to lockdowns and various other measures which are taken by the governments, both in the local setups and also at national setups and also at international fora. You know how those decisions are taken and what kind of basis they have to take such decisions had been illustrated by Professor Giri in a very, very lucid and understandable way. And I'm sure it has helped all of you. And of course, I have enjoyed that session. as I was joking the last session, that I always had this phobia for numbers and symbols, but I think Professor Giri has helped us actually to overcome that phobia, understand those models, understand how to really analyze those numbers, those models in order to get into the right kind of decision making. Now, the fifth session is going to be a more practical session where the IPC relevance in the times of epidemics and pandemics and the necessary tools which are required for the frontline workers are going to be given to us today. Can you run the next slide, Mr. Pranav? So, this series had come out with a joint effort of Infection Control Academy of India, University of Hyderabad, Indian Institute of Public Health, Hyderabad, and in collaboration with Sanmed Healthcare, the largest manufacturer of disinfectants and antiseptics in India. So now, without much ado, I would like actually to go ahead and introduce our today's session speaker, um, Dr. Sukanya. Before that, there are a couple of things which I would like to request. Is one, there is a YouTube channel where all these presentations and all these videos are going to be uploaded. Please ensure that you are going to subscribe to that channel so that not only you can again revisit or review them, but also you can share with your colleagues who could not afford to follow these sessions. And then we have also talked about getting issuing a certificate of accomplishment for those people who have attended at least 4 out of 5 sessions and who have completed the assessments. In case if you haven't done so far the assessments, you still have the chance till month end in order to complete those assessments and claim your certificate. Please ensure that at least 4 out of 5 assessments are completed and the same had been informed to the team of IPC Masterclass. Now, the links are given there, you can actually go back to them and review them. Now, coming to today's session, the name of the session is Infection Control and Prevention from Community to ICU. Practical tools for frontline healthcare workers during epidemics and pandemics. And of course, there is going to be a little bit, Dr. Sukanya is also going to cover about probably the outbreaks. That is what is my understanding. And today I have a great pleasure introducing a good friend and a colleague, and with whom I had a pleasure of working on multiple projects, and I always actually look forward to her lectures. And today it is one more opportunity for me, not only to get a live from her, but also to introduce her. Dr. Sukanya has graduated from Bangalore Medical College and as a rank holder, and she did her MD in microbiology from Madras Medical College. She has a PG diploma in infectious diseases. She is a certified CBIC. That is, as you know, that the CIC is the highest certification any infection preventionist can have. That certificate in infection control, which is issued by APIC CBIC. She has over 14 years of experience in lab diagnostics, hospital-acquired infection prevention and control, good antibiotic prescription practices, infectious diseases management, research, teaching. Of course, she had been a consultant in various organizations, including Fortis. That is where she worked for more than 9 years. And currently, she is working as a consultant for a Singapore-based company called as Medinit, which is focused on healthcare, learning and education for medical professionals. I could go on introducing her with many more accolades she has, but probably it is time to pass on the mic to her. And again, once again, say a very warm welcome, Dr. Sukanya. Over to you, please.
Thank you, Dr. Rangareddy, for that generous introduction. At the outset, I would like to, thank IFCAI and SANMED for actually conceptualizing this, series of webinars, and which has really actually enlightened and enriched our knowledge on the current pandemics. Specific topics like demystifying the myths. These have been very useful because there's a lot of confusion, queries, a lot of information on the net, regarding various aspects of epidemiology and infection prevention and control. So, thank you for that. And good afternoon to all of you. So I think we will start off because without much of an ado, with the topic given, that is infection control and prevention from community to the ICU, practices and tools for frontline healthcare workers during pandemics and epidemics. Yeah. So when we talk about the basics of infection prevention and control, there are some important aspects which we need to really look at. One is understanding the epidemiology of the infection, right? What is the agent? Which is the host? What are the susceptible hosts? What are the different modes of transmission? What are the risk factors? What are the reservoirs of infection which are normally present in nature, natural cycles, and geographic spread? Okay, this has been beautifully covered both in length and breadth by the previous speakers. All of them have done a beautiful job, okay, of describing these epidemiological factors. Okay, and the next is, of course, establishing gaps and opportunities in the chain of transmission. So when we understand the transmission dynamics of an infectious agent, okay, we need to understand what are the opportunities which we can take so that we can actually break this chain of transmission. And the third and the most important is the cornerstone of all infection prevention control practices, which are standard precautions, which was previously called as universal precautions. It's called standard precautions because it's to be applied globally, universally for all infectious agents, for all practices and procedures which we are going to do in healthcare. Okay, and along with that, along with standard precautions, we need to understand transmission-based precautions based on the infectious agent which we're dealing with in any pandemic or epidemic situation. Okay, right. Now, when we come to the control measures which we normally employ, right, when you talk about IPC measures, there is a hierarchy of control measures, right, starting first from early recognition and reporting of the infection. Right, how do we do this? Because this itself can be a barrier and it can prevent transmission of infections both in community and healthcare. The second is early assessment of the patient whom you receive in the healthcare and triaging of the patients. And third is the implementation of control measures. So implementation of control measures comprises of a large number of parameters. The first being maintaining separation and space and time between suspected and confirmed cases. I will talk a little more detail about how we can do it in the following slides. Education on standard precautions and transmission-based precautions. This is very important. Many times we just give protocols and we think that everybody should follow these protocols, but we have to educate, train, and make aware and make them understand as to why these protocols, why these standard precautions and transmission-based precautions are important, how it is actually going to prevent the person from getting infected or passing on the infection. So education on these precautions has to be given not only for the healthcare workers, that is the staff, it also has to be given for visitors, okay, and the attendants, patients' attendants who are accompanying such sick patients. Okay. The third is prompt implementation. So once you educate, you have to start implementing transmission-based precautions promptly at the front line, that is at the emergency desk, at the billing and the registration counters. This is extremely important to limit the spread at the outset itself. Then restricting access of ill patients, that there are several ways in which we can do it and methods in which we can do it by means of teleconsults, telemedicine, etc. Okay, and even reconfiguring the entire way the OPD or the ER functions. And of course, you need to have a healthcare worker sick policy. So you need to assess your healthcare workers who are working as frontline warriors, right? Assess whether they are infected, they need a particular time to take rest, they require quarantine, isolation, give them wages, do not deduct wages. Okay, so they need to be they need to be present a very well-defined policy for healthcare workers as a sick leave policy, and also for their vaccination and other important requirements for them. And the last but not the least is the planning and implementation of strategies for surge capacity. So as an administrator in a hospital or in a healthcare, even if it's a small clinic, you need to understand that we need to prepare. How are we going to prepare our hospital to combat the sudden increase in the number of cases, which we would definitely get when there's going to be a peak during the pandemic. So these are some of the important control measures in a hierarchical fashion. Okay. Now coming to the transmission dynamics in healthcare, right? So before we understand what are the measures which we can implement, we need to understand how does an infectious agent spread. Now, if we take the example of the present pandemic, that is SARS-CoV-2 pandemic, we know that the virus is predominantly a respiratory pathogen, and therefore, obviously, the methods or modes of transmission are droplets, aerosols, as well as both direct and indirect contact. Right. So droplets obviously will be the method of transmission when anybody or any susceptible host is within 1 meter of the patient. Right. So these droplets are heavy, more than 5 microns in diameter, and they are short range droplets. So they will not travel for a long distance. So if another susceptible host or another person is within 1 meter, okay, of the patient, then the droplets which are released by coughing and sneezing, okay, can directly impinge on the host's exposed conjunctiva, as well as the nasal and the oral mucosa, and this can directly lead to an infection. That is one method. The other is the aerosol route. So when do we get aerosol mode of transmission? When does this happen? This happens specifically during aerosol generating procedures. So we'll talk about what are the different aerosol generating procedures and what are the specific precautions we need to take for that, right? The next is a direct transmission that can happen obviously by our hands. Okay, is the most common, most fundamental method of transmission, and the most important way in which you can actually prevent infections. Okay, so contamination of the hands of the patient, if they are not going to practice a proper respiratory etiquette, okay, this can lead to spread by contamination of hands of the patient, who will then contaminate another person, a susceptible host, or also contaminate the surroundings. And droplets which can actually are released by the patient can impinge on any inanimate surfaces and equipment which are within 1 meter of the patient. So all inanimate surfaces and objects and equipment which are within 1 meter of the patient can easily get contaminated with viable viruses, and this in turn can lead to an indirect spread to another susceptible host. So these are the various modes of transmission of the present SARS-CoV-2. Okay, and it's important that the hands, we need to keep in mind, hands are the primary methods of spread, because if you look at it on an average, humans touch their face, okay, up to 20 times an hour. Okay, this is a statistic study. It was interesting, so I put it. Okay, with about 44% of these touches involving the nose, eyes, and the mouth. Okay, so these are some of the quickest entry points for the virus into the body's interior. So please, I will again reiterate that we need to reinforce hand hygiene as the most important preventive and control measure. Right. So there are some interesting facts about COVID-19. Why they are interesting is because they are extremely useful as they form the basis for formulating recommendations and guidelines. Okay. Now, if you look at it, you see in the society, we say that, okay, please wear masks. Okay, in the community, please wear masks, surgical masks, maintain social distancing. This is because there is a large number, as you already know, 80% of SARS-CoV infections, CoV-2 infections are asymptomatic infections. And asymptomatic transmission of the virus happens within, beginning from 48 hours before the onset of symptoms and continues for up to 20 days, even after the onset of the symptom. So this is something which we need to really be careful about. And this is exactly the fundamental reason as to why we advise wearing of surgical masks or, cloth masks and maintenance of social distances. In fact, there have been studies which say that if there is no masks worn at all, the rate of transmission can be up to 70%. If there is only the person, that is the patient, who's wearing the surgical mask, then the rate of transmission is up to 5%. And if, both of them are wearing masks, that is both the patient as well as a susceptible host are wearing masks, then the percentage of transmission comes down to 1.5%. So this is the importance of asymptomatic transmission, and this is important, and this is the reason why all the public health measures are actually directed towards mask and social distancing. Okay, transmission from asymptomatic cases is accountable for up to 13% of cases in the present pandemic of COVID-19. So it's extremely important for us to keep this in mind. Now, let's talk a little bit about persistence of the virus. Why is this important? Because we talk about disinfection protocols, right? We tell you need to disinfect your home surfaces at least twice a day or thrice a day, right? Why is it so important? Because viruses, many studies have found that SARS-CoV-2 virus, viable virus particles, okay, can survive on plastics, stainless steels, okay, for up to 72 hours, cardboards, papers, folders, case sheets for up to 24 hours, okay, and on the outer surface of masks for up to 7 days. So if we are in a practice of, reusing masks, suppose you're working in a COVID-19 dedicated ward, the advice or the recommendation is not to reuse these masks, whether it is surgical mask or N95 mask. If you're going to use N95 mask continuously for more than 8 hours, then it is not recommended to reuse them. Whatever the reason is, it is not recommended to reuse. Okay, so because these viable viruses have been, isolated and identified on the outer surfaces of masks for up to 7 days. So this is something important. Also, indoor ACs. Okay, when you're talking about an ideal IT office or any office which has got a centralized AC or a healthcare, okay, normally the temperature will be 22 to 25 with a relative humidity and temperature of 40 to 60%. That's the ideal AC, environment when you're working in the office or in a healthcare. And in such an environment, it's important to remember that the viruses can be present, okay, for up to 5 days. So, okay, that is important. And high rates of positivity have been found even in the flows on your computer mouse, that is actually biomedical waste trash cans and on patient masks. So it's extremely important to keep these facts in mind, because based on this, there are several recommendations which differ as per the job or the place in which you're working in. It's important also to remember that viral persistence depends a lot upon the temperature and the humidity of the environment. It has already been covered previously. I'm just making a point. Now, coming to chain of infection transmission, why is this important? So as I told you in the beginning, when we understand, when we talk about infection prevention and control, we need to understand the transmission dynamics of the infectious agent. And we also need to understand what are the gaps and the opportunities in which we can actually, we can make use of to prevent transmission of infection. This is a beautiful classical slide, which we normally use for IPC training, whenever we take classes. Okay, and this slide actually clearly points out, okay, the different measures which you can take, and all these measures and all these practices, okay, which are given here, that is employee health, environmental sanitation, sterilization, disinfection practices, hand hygiene, PPE, biomedical waste disposal, air engineering controls, okay, and specific preventive and prevention and control measures for healthcare acquired infections. All these are a part fundamentally of standard precautions and transmission-based precautions. So this is how we will actually address breaking the chain of transmission. Yeah. Now, when we talked about, the first step which we need to do as frontline healthcare workers, we need to first recognize early and implement what is called as source control. For this, we need to understand who are the sources of infection, who are the main sources of infection. So they could be symptomatic patients who are admitted in healthcare. These will be normally very sick patients who are admitted in the ICU or in COVID-19 dedicated units. Okay. Then in community settings, you have both moderate or mildly infected people who may be symptomatic, and you have a large number of asymptomatic people in the community, okay, who are also important sources of infection. And the last is the infected healthcare workers. So this again is a very important point, because many times we talk about community, we talk about the healthcare setting, prevention of cross transmission, but what we normally forget and sometimes we miss out is our healthcare worker safety and health. So these people can also act as important reservoirs of infection, transmitting the infections, okay, to other patients and also to their family members when they go home. So as we understand, people are at the center of the phenomenon. They can be okay, they can act as reservoirs, okay, who are actually symptomatic patients. Okay, they can act as transmitters, who are patients who are admitted in healthcare, okay, especially during the treatment. And they can also be receptors for microorganisms, who are generally healthcare workers and susceptible hosts in the community. And these receptors in turn can again become reservoirs. So this is how people are at the center of the entire process of transmission of infection. Now, coming to methods of reduction and prevention of infections at the front line, as I've already told you, one is early recognition and investigation. So assume or just imagine that we are working in an emergency room or a casualty. What are the methods by which we can actually prevent infections at that point, right? What are the barriers we can put at that point? So if you look at it, the first important thing is visual alerts. Okay, visual alerts in the form of posters, signages, videos, okay, reminders, okay, detailing what are the symptoms we have to watch for when a person enters into the healthcare. Okay, so that is something very important. Anybody, even a housekeeping staff, uneducated or illiterate person, can understand if you represent these symptoms in a pictorial way. Okay, so this is a very important thing. The next important thing is to collect triaging information. So there are two ways in which you can actually book appointments. One is you can pick up the phone and book an appointment, or you can walk in, right? So there is something called as phone triaging. So you can actually educate your frontline workers. Now, who are the frontline workers who are billing, who are doing your registration? They are non-medical people. It's important for you to remember that they are non-medical people. So you need to educate them and make them aware as to what are the different modes of transmission, how infection can actually occur from the patient to another patient, from the patient to them. Okay, so once you educate them on what are the symptoms, what is the important contact history which you need to elicit from the patient while they book an appointment, it becomes easy to do what is called as phone triaging. So when they pick up the phone and when they book an appointment, they can actually elicit fever, travel history, contact history, and symptoms from the patient before the patient actually comes into the healthcare system. Okay, they should, along with the customer care, along with the billing and the reception, there should also be a nurse, okay, who will assess patients who are coming in for a walk-in appointment. Okay, so a nurse will help in assessing the clinical condition of the patient and whether that particular patient requires any additional transmission-based precautions, and she can prioritize. Suppose a patient comes very sick with dyspnea, large amount of coughing, expectoration is high, large productive cough with the excessive secretions, then in such case she can prioritize and she can arrange for an early consult and an isolation. That is one thing. Also, patients with high suspicion of infectious risk, they should be accommodated in a designated area away from other patients. So this is what I talked to you about, reconfiguring your OPD or your ER. Okay, you can streamline and you can actually say that this corridor is for ILI and suspected COVID cases, and this is for the other non-respiratory illnesses. Okay. Another important thing is respiratory hygiene and cough etiquette, which should be mandated in these OPDs and ERs. Okay. It's important to, provide resources for such things. So please ensure that there are adequate disposable tissues which you can offer to patients. Not all patients are educated and not all patients will come in with a bunch of tissues. So it's important that when you say practice respiratory etiquette in OPD, you also have to provide resources for that, right? So the other important thing is people who come with non-COVID like symptoms, okay, for other medical emergencies. So such patients can be fast-tracked, isolated away from the respiratory patients, and you can facilitate an early consultation and departure from the hospital, and you can tell them that you can follow up with a teleconsult or a telemedication. So this is how, as frontline people in both the ER and the casualty, starting right from billing and customer care registration, you can actually prevent and reduce your burden of infections during this current pandemic times. Now, in healthcare, there are two major components, what we call as prevention practices and control practices, correct? So prevention practices, we all know, they are standard precautions and optimization of use of PPE. Okay, you have quarantine, triaging, which I already talked to you about, telemedicine and teleconsults, wherein you can prevent people from actually coming and entering into your healthcare. Okay, the other important thing is guidance and tools for caring for patients at home. Now, why is this important? Suppose the healthcare or your clinic is catering to a population of immunosuppressed patients. It's primarily a cancer hospital, okay? Or if it has a large geriatric OPD. In such cases, you can actually look at providing tools and guidance for patients who are chronically ill or who have metabolic disorders. You can actually facilitate teleconsults and telemedication, provide tools in the form of like you can actually communicate with them through various technology assisted devices. Like most of them have got smartphones. You can use WhatsApp, you can use messages, you can post videos, etc. Right. The other important thing in prevention practice is your visitor policy. Now, it's extremely important that this policy is not a policy on paper. Please remember, many times you just have a visitor policy in the IC manual, and it's not implemented at all. You see large number of people coming in to see a very sick patient. This has to be strictly implemented, and the person who's controlling the traffic, okay, in the visitor area, that is a security person or the nurse, has to be empowered to stop or to restrict these visitors. Okay, so what do you actually do? First is that you restrict the number of visitors. Okay, you decrease the frequency of visits. Okay, you have to put up visible posters and signages saying what are the precautions they should take while they're visiting, like such as no touch policy, use of appropriate personal protective equipment. Okay, and so these are some of the things which you need to do and incorporate and implement as a part of the visitor policy. The other important thing is the healthcare worker sick leave policy. This is very important. I already talked to you about it. The vaccination policy and risk assessment of the healthcare workers before every shift, so as to assess whether they are infected or not, and to implement certain work restrictions based on their symptoms. Right. So all these comprise what are called as prevention practices. Coming to control practices, okay, basically they are hand hygiene, respiratory etiquette, isolation, disinfection, all these which come under standard precautions, but these are practices. And along with that, you can do cohorting of patients. Suppose your healthcare doesn't have a particular facility, doesn't have space to have single rooms or negative isolation rooms, then you can actually cohort all the COVID-like suspected cases in one ward, the COVID positive cases in one ward, and other influenza-like illness which is COVID negative in another ward. So this is called cohorting, placing some patients with similar illnesses in one particular area. Staff cohorting can also be done. So you can actually dedicate your staff, okay, to different cohorts or cohort areas. So that also can be done. Social distancing, I have already explained what the rate of transmission, okay, if social distancing is not, implemented. And of course, awareness and education is extremely important. Again and again, I'm reinforcing this because many times we put posters and we forget to even look at it. So this needs to be reinforced. So this is a beautiful table, from the US interim guidelines, the CDC guidelines, which talks about the mitigation activities, that is the control activities, which a healthcare as an administration can actually do, okay, to prevent the transmission of COVID-19. This is based on the level of community transmission. So based on, suppose there is none to minimal rate of transmission in that particular locality, then there are a different set of activities which a administration can do. If it's minimal to moderate, it's different. And if it's there is a substantial community transmission of COVID, then the activities and the recommendations are different. So this, in a nutshell, okay, will help the administration to put out certain recommendations and implement their processes. Now, coming to the basics of infection prevention and control, I've been talking to you about standard precautions, universal precautions. So what are these standard precautions? Okay, I said they are global universal precautions. There is a series of steps, okay, right? And they are based on risk assessment, common sense practice. It's not anything hi-fi. You don't require great technology for these. And the most important in this current pandemic is the appropriate use of personal protective equipment. Please remember, it's appropriate use and not just use of all PPE. Right. So in specific for COVID-19, along with standard precautions, you will also implement droplet, contact, and aerosol or airborne precautions, especially when you're talking about aerosol generating procedures. Right. This is a diagrammatic representation of what are all the components and parameters and practices which come under standard precautions. Yeah, so these are the 10 components of standard precautions, starting from hand hygiene, barrier precautions, patient placement. Okay, where do you place patients? As I talked to you about cohorting, isolation, right? Sharp etiquette. This is very important. Management of sharps, safe handling of women, disposal of clinical waste, okay, cleaning and disinfection of equipment, management of blood and body fluid exposure, respiratory hygiene or cough etiquette, and safe injection practices. All these are important components of standard precautions. Right. Now, additional precautions, which I already talk to you about. Okay. In this, the most important, highlights of this slide are the engineering controls. Okay. If you look at engineering controls, the first point, adequately ventilated single rooms. Okay. Very important, right? Sometimes you may not have an isolation room with engineering controls, but you can still do ensure a natural ventilation, okay, in a single room. So this is important. Wearing of appropriate PPE, use of single use or disposable equipment as far as possible, right? And specimen collection in the laboratory is another important highlight, as an additional precautions, because many times we send patients to the laboratory and the lab has absolutely no air changes. It's located in a very small place. There's no ventilation even, okay, and a phlebotomist who's wearing the usual PPE is actually collecting the sample, whether it is induction of sputum or whether it is collection of oropharyngeal and nasopharyngeal swabs. Okay, additional precautions for airborne has to be taken by the technicians. Okay, the first, Mr. Pranav, do you want to take this, and how do I go? How about the poll question?
Yeah, so I'm just activating the poll. So I request all the participants to respond. You can see the poll just below your screen. In mobile, it will show at the below. So when should you wear N95 mask? There are options given. I see response is coming, so I wait for 10 seconds before I publish that result. So the response is coming for 100% people responding the same option, that is during CPR. No, there is a change. Sorry, there is a change. I should wait a little bit more. Okay, so 92% people response during CPR, chest physiotherapy, during induction of sputum of sample collection. So this is changing. So I will wait another few seconds more. I think now I see the diverse response is coming up.
Okay.
So I'm ending the poll now. So see the result. So 84% feel that it is that during CPR, chest physiotherapy, during induction of a sputum for sample collection. Another 11% says that nurse recording vital for COVID-19 positive case. And 4% says that during the housekeeping activities in COVID-19. So what's your comments, Dr. Sukanya here?
Okay, so wonderful. I really wanted a diverse opinion on this, because there are very confusing options. Many times we think that any nurse or any housekeeper who's working in a COVID-19 dedicated area should wear an N95 mask. It is not so. Okay, there are a surgical mask will suffice, because there is no aerosol generating procedure in these activities, right? In C and D, there are no aerosol generating procedures. Whereas A, as rightly pointed out by 85% of the audience, I'm glad to hear. Okay, CPR is an aerosol generating procedure. Similarly, chest physiotherapy and induction of sputum are definite aerosol generating procedures. So the importance of this is only there are defined aerosol generating procedures. The next slide. Yeah. Okay, and this is the list of the aerosol generating procedures wherein we need to wear N95 mask. Okay, it's very important that you also take into account a patient on BiPAP, CPAP. Okay, when you're giving high frequency oscillating ventilation, when you're giving high flow nasal oxygen through a cannula, that also is an aerosol generating procedure. And chest physiotherapy, reprocessing of ventilator circuits, okay, and collecting swabs are extremely important opportunities for wearing an N95 mask. So let's move on to the next. I hope I've clarified. If anybody has a question on nebulization and humidified oxygen, I'm surprised nobody actually gave that as an option, but there have been debates and controversies on that. But it has been proven and by studies and research that they do not have a high risk of aerosol generation for a COVID-19 patient. But the important thing is, suppose you are giving a nebulization or a high flow or a humidified oxygen to a patient who is a COVID-19 positive case, there are some precautions. One is you can change over to a metered dose inhaler in case of nebulization, if possible. Otherwise, you close the door. of the patient when you give the nebulization, stand outside or maintain at least 6 to 12 feet distance from the patient, so that, and of course wear your appropriate mask, which is not N95, which is a surgical mask with the face shield, right? So this is important for when you're giving nebulization or humidified oxygen to a patient who is COVID-19 positive, right? I hope I'm clear. Okay, now coming to transmission-based precautions. First of all, we have initiated transmission-based precautions. When do we stop transmission-based precautions? So as soon as all the symptoms, okay, stop, we can let go of transmission-based precautions, but we still have to maintain standard precautions, which are universal precautions. So this table basically talks about the details of each of those important precautions and how we have to actually do it, right? Starting right from hand hygiene, patient placement, cleaning and disinfection of equipment, environment, linen handling, biomedical waste, transportation of a COVID-19 positive patient or a suspect COVID, okay, from if you want to transfer to a ward, from the ward to a radiology, what are the precautions you have to take as a transmission-based precautions, right? So this slide, you can please go through in detail. There are a lot of such tables which are extremely good, right? Now coming again to my favorite topic, which is hand hygiene, okay? We have been talking about hand hygiene from time immemorial, from the time of Ignaz Semmelweis. Okay, we recently had the World Hand Hygiene Day and all that, but still, if you look at hand hygiene compliance, it is pathetic. Okay, so what we need to do, how do we improve compliance? What are the things which we need to do regarding hand hygiene in the present pandemic? The two important things in hand hygiene is reiterating and redefining the opportunities for hand hygiene practice, right? I'll talk to you what are the redefining moments of hand hygiene opportunities, but this is the standard WHO 5 moments for hand hygiene, and this has to anyway be taught. Okay, we could put it as posters, videos, okay, demos, whatever it is, and you have to do audits for these hand hygiene opportunities, right? Now, the other important thing in hand hygiene is the technique of hand hygiene, right? So please remember, there are two aspects when you talk about hand hygiene. One is the opportunities. The second is the technique. Technique is equally important as the opportunities, because if the healthcare worker or the community does not know the right way of doing a hand washing with soap or using an alcohol-based hand rub, then the entire objective of availing that opportunity is lost, right? Another integral part of hand washing is hand drying. I have not put up this slide. I thought I'll talk about it. Drying of hands after hand washing, especially in healthcare, should not be by hand dryers. Please remember, okay, because they can actually disperse droplets of infectious agents into the atmosphere and contaminate all equipment in and around the place, right? So the best, most efficient way of doing a hand hygiene, okay, I mean a hand drying, is by use of disposable paper towels. Okay, let's go to poll question 2. So we've completed hand hygiene opportunities. We've talked about techniques. So the most important part is monitoring, right? How do you know that your people are doing the correct technique or using the correct opportunities? So which do you think is the best way to monitor hand hygiene? Okay, A, direct observation, B, alcohol-based hand rub, or soap consumption, like you can monitor the consumption of soap or alcohol from the stores and say that, okay, last month it was less, this month it's more, the consumption, therefore my hand hygiene compliance is more. Or C, video monitoring, using cameras in different clinical areas and looking at what is the hand hygiene compliance in ICUs and high-risk areas. Or the last one is using technology like ATP luminometer or glow germ kits.
Again, very diverse response we are getting. I will allow another 10 seconds to respond. Last time there was a complaint that we have not given enough time to respond, so I'm giving you 2 more seconds. Interesting. So I'm going to publish now. I'm going to end the poll now. Dr. Sukanya.
Yeah.
So 50% people say direct observation, okay. 19% say alcohol-based hand rub, okay. 19% again says video monitoring, and 11% says ATP luminometer or glow germ kits. Okay, so we're still dealing with the conservative audience, who is still doing, who believes in direct observation. No problem. All of these are methods for monitoring hand hygiene compliance. But with the current pandemic situation and with the way in which we are now interacting using technology and webinars for educating, right? I think that we need to move towards technology-based
hand hygiene compliance monitoring, okay, which will be more objective. Okay, it will not be subjective, because direct observation, errors can be there. It is called, if you go and if you stand there, then people wash better. Okay, so there is a bias, right? Alcohol based hand rub consumption and soap consumption, you can have skewed up data, because you can use alcohol based hand rubs. I've seen people using alcohol based hand rubs for disinfecting their mobile phones, stethoscope. So for reasons which not at all directly connected with hand hygiene, consumption of alcohol can go up. So that again, data can be skewed up. Video monitoring, yes, but there are some specific clinical areas wherein patient confidentiality has to be protected, and therefore we cannot have video monitoring in very high risk ICUs. Okay, and that again becomes a barrier. So I would not say that ATP or glow germ kit is the recommended monitoring hand hygiene recommended monitoring tool, but I feel it is the way forward in the coming eras of pandemics and epidemics. Yeah. So coming to hand hygiene tools as such, we've talked about the practices of hand hygiene, opportunities, techniques, right? And monitoring tools. The major important things what we need to highlight when you talk about hand hygiene in the current pandemic are the availability of resources. Very important. We can tell our healthcare workers, please go and wash, but there'll be one single sink within the patient's restroom for the whole 20-bedded ward. So it's not practical, right? So you have to ensure adequacy of hand washing stations with running water, adequate soap, right? You also have to look at the ease and accessibility and availability of hand rubs. Okay, please remember that you cannot have the hand rub in the patient's drawer, okay, inside, right? It has to be placed at the bedside, and it should be visible, so that if anybody attends to the patient, immediately the first step would be use of the hand rub. Okay, that is important. Availability from the store, accessibility. Okay, the concentration of alcohol again needs to be checked, because nowadays all hospitals are flooded with alcohol based hand rubs, gels, foams, whatever you name it, you get it, right? But it's important as an infection control preventionist and also as a healthcare worker to assess and see whether it contains a minimum of 65% alcohol. Okay, that is important. 65 to 90% alcohol should be the concentration for hand rub. And please address skin irritation issues. Lot of our healthcare workers who are working in COVID-19 dedicated areas will definitely have skin irritation issues and allergic issues because of maybe quality issues of the soap and the hand rubs. So you need to address this. If you do not address this and take this into consideration, your hand hygiene compliance will definitely come down, right? The next is education and awareness aids. We've already talked about it, okay, and monitoring. Now, what are the hand hygiene hotspots during COVID-19 implementation? The important things I told you we can redefine hand hygiene opportunities. What are those important opportunities which you need to audit during the COVID-19 pandemic? PPE removal. Okay, what is the hand hygiene compliance? Handling the PPE during use. Okay, if they're adjusting the mask, they're adjusting the goggles, are they doing a hand hygiene? That's an opportunity which normally you may not see. Okay, and of course, last is touching all inanimate surfaces around the patient, which is actually the fifth moment of hand hygiene. The hotspot areas to audit, of course, are ER, ICU, radiology, lab sample collection rooms, phlebotomy rooms, OPD fever clinics, and triage areas. Okay, availability and access of hand rubs and washing stations, I've already pointed about this importance of location of alcohol-based hand rubs. We are very happy. We know that ICU should have, ward should have, COVID-19 area should have, but there are some public commonplace areas, again, which you need to reiterate and ensure that hand rubs are present. And these are entries, any entry and exit, okay, into the healthcare, lifts, PPE disposal areas, waiting rooms, registration and billing counters, all OPD rooms, linen and laundry. Many times we forget. Okay, ambulances and mortuary. Okay, the other things I've already talked to you about. Right, the important group of people whom we may need to concentrate little more during the pandemic are chest physiotherapists. Basically physiotherapists, dialysis technicians, and patients attendants. Have a separate audit, okay, of these specific groups of people for their hand hygiene compliance. It will help you to address where are the gaps. Okay, coming now to personal protective equipment. If you look at it, please remember, PPE doesn't mean you get a whole set with a full gown and goggles and a big astronaut set type of a space suit. We are not interested in that. We have to assess and choose your PPE as per the risk of exposure. You should avoid contamination of the PPE, discard the PPE as per the hospital policy. If you need to reuse or reprocess, you have to follow it as per the hospital policy. Do not share PPE and change PPE immediately after you attend to a patient or to a procedure. Do not carry over the PPE for any other duty of yours or when you're going to attend another patient, right? So these are the principles of personal protective equipment. Donning and doffing of PPE is extremely important. What is the order of donning of the PPE? Which I should wear first, which I should wear last. Similarly, when you remove, which I should remove first. Okay, so this is extremely important because this will actually help in prevention of contamination to yourselves as well as to the surroundings. I will not dwell too much into this practice because all of us know about it. We've been training our healthcare workers on this. But what we need to take away from the slide is this has to be an important point when you're teaching your staff about use of personal protective equipment. And you need to monitor this randomly. Okay, randomly monitor in any area and at a defined frequency. So if you monitor doffing in ICU in a COVID-19 area, you monitor doffing in radiology also. You monitor doffing in lab also. Okay, so you have to define monitoring of donning and doffing, which is an important part of your audit. Next, so these are tables which I'll be running through all these 3 slides because beautiful tables and tools. These are tools which you can use as ready reckoners, okay, to to actually put out recommendations as to when I should use which PP, right? Okay, it is both for clinical staff as well as for non-clinical staff, and based on whether the patient has got respiratory symptoms or patient has not got any respiratory symptoms. So this table clearly can be used as a tool. This is again a tool which can be used specifically in COVID-19 dedicated areas. Okay, both for based on the activity which the different types of staff does, right from clinical staff to preparation of the dead body, okay, cleaners, okay, nursing, catering staff, what is the PPE which they should wear. This is again a very important tool, easy to use and refer to. Okay, here again, this is a continuation of the same. Okay, you also have, in fact, these 3 slides as you can be compiled as one particular table, and you can put it up in the nursing stations on their desktops. You can also put it up as posters, okay, so that anybody who's walking into the healthcare, into a ward or a COVID-19 area or even a non-COVID area will be able to understand what PPE they should be actually wearing. Okay, this is specifically for primary healthcare facilities, okay, and emergency units and temporary facilities. Okay, then next is you have specific PPE, appropriate use of PPE for ambulance services. This is very important. You can actually paste it. You can teach. You can use it as a tool to teach your ambulance staff, emergency medical staff about what PPE they should wear. Right? Why is this important? Right? Why is this important? Why are we talking so much 3-4 slides on the appropriate use of PPE? Because we need not waste PPE. We are having a resource constraint. We are having constraints of PPE. Why should we unnecessarily wear PPE? You can imagine how difficult and uncomfortable it will be when you are actually wearing inappropriate PPE for a job which doesn't require it. Right? So to summarize in healthcare, this is the levels of protection. And based on the levels of protection, okay, these are the different personal protective equipment which you should be wearing. Okay, the level of protection is based on the scope of application. This is again use of PPE at home, okay, which is mainly only a surgical mask, right? Then the community, right? Again, in community, inside homes, in public areas, in public transport areas, it's very clearly given that there is no PPE required. Now, why is this slide important in community? Is because many times we live in gated closed communities, we live in apartments, okay? Many times people, tell that these are the rules. Everybody should wear this particular mask. So you please refer to these recommendations and guidelines, use them as tools and educate the community as to what appropriate and sufficient PPE they should wear rather than wasting PPE, right? Now coming to the poll question 3, is certification of PPE important? We're talking about PPE so much. So is any stamp or seal or certification important for personal protective equipment like gowns and masks? And if so, what are the bodies which certify masks and gowns?
Okay, again, we are getting very diverse response. We allow 10-15 more seconds. We are getting response. Okay, so I'm just ending the poll now,
Okay.
just to show the response. Yes, doctor. I able to see that this 57% people says NIOSH CDC, the
Okay.
and 30% says NIOSH SITRA Citra.
Okay.
This is two majority response from the
Great.
audience.
Great. So the next slide will give you the answer, right? So masks are definitely to be certified, especially the N95 mask is to be certified by NIOSH. Okay, it should be NIOSH certified or NIOSH approved. Okay, that is one of the important certifications for the N95 mask. And for other surgical masks and for the gowns, you have CITRA, which is a correct response. And along with that, you have DRDO in Mass in Delhi, you have factory in Chennai, Kanpur, West Bengal. All these are bodies which certify the quality of your gowns and masks. So when you buy your gowns or PPE, it's important to keep in mind that you educate your stores or your purchase manager on these particular issues, so that they are open and they do not get low quality PPE which will not serve any purpose. The other important tool when we talk about personal protective equipment, one is certification. The second is donning and doffing, which I already talked to you, the importance of donning and doffing. This has to be practiced. How do you educate them? You show them videos wherein people have done mistakes while donning or doffing, and there's been a contamination to themselves or on the surroundings. Okay, ways in which PPE can contaminate surroundings. All these can be made as videos for training for donning and doffing. Okay, reuse and reprocessing protocols for their masks need to be very well defined, and each department should not have their own protocol. It should be a centralized policy, and the same protocol, standardized protocol, has to be followed across all departments. Okay, also decontamination protocols of your visors, that is face shields, are very important. You should educate your healthcare workers as to how they can decontaminate and use these, because these are not single use PPE, they are to be reused. Okay, this is a slide wherein you actually show how to wear the particulate respirator. The most important thing in this slide is the seal check. Okay, many of the clinicians do not know what is seal check. When you wear an N95 mask, the most important is its fitness. Okay, whether it fits you properly. Okay, there are two tests. One is a positive pressure checking you can do, or you can do a negative pressure checking. Okay, and you have to do these tests in order to ensure that your N95 mask fits well. This is very important point when you're talking about the N95 mask. Yeah, similarly removal also. Now, what is extended or reprocessing of PPE? It's a big controversial topic. There's several debates, several papers which have been published on it. Okay, this is again a table from the US interim guidelines. At this point, they did not have any protocol for reprocessing of N95 masks, but now we do have certain protocols and certain processes. Okay, so this is again a table which you can use as a ready reckoner, as a tool as to what you can process and how you can process. Okay. Right. So the poll question 4 is on reprocessing. Okay. Which method is not recommended for reuse of N95 mask in a resource constrained situation? Which method is not recommended? A, single dry heat sterilization at 70 degrees centigrade for 30 minutes. B, store in a dry Ziploc cover and reuse once in 5 days. C, disinfect the mask with 70% alcohol. And D, UV disinfection method.
So we are getting response very fast. Again, I think opinion is divided this time, much more diverse.
Okay.
Right. So let's allow them a little more time. Very, very diverse result, very diverse response. So okay, I'm ending the poll now.
Okay.
Which is very, I think, here you can see the result is that 33% people says that disinfect the mask with 70% alcohol. Same number of people also says that a store in a dry Ziploc. I think this is Ziploc cover and reuse.
Yeah, reuse after 5 days. Yeah.
Right. and the 18% UV disinfectant method, and another 14% says that single dry heat sterilization at 70 degree Celsius for
Okay,
30
so great.
minutes.
Okay, so let's look at the slides, right? That there your answers will be there. I told you it's a very controversial and debatable topic, right? Right. Now, please remember that CDC has given certain recommendations, which is called as the 5-day reuse strategy. Okay. Now, more very important is before you reuse, you should remember and you should know how to remove your N95 respirator. Please do not touch the front of your mask, whether it's a surgical mask or whether it's an N95 mask. The most contaminated part of your mask is the front portion of the mask. Okay, like you could have and there are, in fact, there's so much of literature on the type of surgical mask, etc. We'll not go into that. Okay, the important point is not to contaminate your hands by touching the front of the N95 respirator. So this diagram beautifully gives as to how you will be removing an N95 mask and how you will be storing it. You should not be crushing it. Okay, so you can reuse your N95 mask in very extremely resource constrained situation. When there is no other option at all, then you can use this strategy by the CDC, wherein each healthcare worker is given a set of 5 masks. Okay, and each on day 1 after use of the N95 mask, they have to remove it carefully. Okay, and keep it in a Ziploc cover, label that with their name, okay, and ID, and they can store it in a dry place. On the day 2, they use the second one, day 3, day 4, and day 5. After using the 5th N95 mask and storing it in a similar fashion, on day 6, they can reuse the first N95 mask. So this is called the 5-day reuse recycling strategy by CDC. But please remember that this is not the best option. This is the last resort. When you really don't have N95 masks at all, then this strategy can be adopted. Right now, there are other 2 methods which we will discuss in the next slide. That is the UV disinfection. Not able to, yeah. Okay, so the approved methods, okay, which are now being actually practiced in many healthcares are single dry heat sterilization. Okay, which you can do by using an oven. You can actually, you reuse it by sterilizing at 70 degrees centigrade for 30 minutes. Okay, this is one way. And the other way is UV disinfection. So when you do a reprocessing of masks, what are the 2 important criteria you need to keep in mind? One is the process should not decrease the filtration efficacy of your mask. Correct. Second one is that it should be able to kill any viable virus which may be present on the outer surface of your mask. These are the 2 outcomes which you would look for when you are reprocessing your mask. So when they assessed various methods like plasma sterilization, autoclaving, okay, those had other issues like it got deformed, it could not withstand the temperature and the sterilization process. Some did lost the filtration efficacy from more than 95%, right? So this the only 2 methods which came out which were good for reprocessing were single dry heat sterilization and UV disinfection. Okay, so these 2 can, as of now, can be used for reuse of your N95 mask. As even in case sometimes you can also use it for your surgical mask. But my suggestion is, if you're using a surgical mask for more than 6 hours, please, especially in healthcare, I'm not talking about in home. In home, we don't use on a continuous basis. In healthcare, in a COVID-19 area, if you're using these masks for a continued period of time, N95 masks for more than 8 hours and your surgical masks for more than 6 hours, then you definitely need to dispose it. Right. Coming to protective eyewear indications, I'm not going to go through it in detail because of the lack of time. Already exceeded my time. Right. Of course, you have to wear well-fitting goggles. Your specs which you're wearing now are not going to protect you from splashes. Okay, so please wear appropriate goggles, which will also ensure sight protection. Okay, and if you're wearing a glass, then wear the mask under the glass so that there's no clouding of your glasses. And you can wear the goggles on top of your existing glasses. So these are some things which is very important to keep in mind, especially when you're wearing the goggles. Goggles and face shields are 2 of the PPE which are not single-use or disposable items. So you need to decontaminate these and wear it. So how do you decontaminate? You can use 70% alcohol, or you can use peroxide or quaternary ammonium compound wipes. Now, Coming to gloves, there are certain do's and don'ts of gloves. I've put this slide because I'm now going to talk to you about how you wear sterile gloves, how do you doff it. I'm not going to talk about it. But what I'm going to talk about it is the principles of glove wearing. And this is extremely important because many times we don't wear gloves which fit properly. Okay. And that is something which will, the whole purpose is lost, right? If you don't wear a well-fitting glove. Change the gloves between patients, between tasks and procedures, even on the same patient. So suppose you have a patient, you have to check the central line and you also have to check the Foley's catheter. Work from clean to dirty, right? Or the best is to change the gloves in between these two procedures on the same patient. Limit opportunities for contamination. Don't wear gloves and think you're protected and touch everything else around you or touch your friend or your other healthcare workers or yourself, right? That's very important. And remove gloves promptly after touching any items, and please perform a hand hygiene after removal and also before you put on gloves. If gloves are visibly soiled, then use of alcohol based hand rubs are not recommended. You need to do a hand washing with soap and water. Right. Now, for all the nurse administrators and the people who are, involved in actually looking and indenting for consumables of PPE now during the pandemic times, this is a beautiful way in which you can actually predict your consumption of PPE. Why is this important? Because it will help you to actually indent according to the requirements of your particular unit. So there will be no wastage, and you can actually share PPE with other departments if your consumption is low. Okay, so appropriate use of PPE first as a ready reckoner tool, the previous slides, should be done. And once you're using PPE as per the appropriate use, obviously your PPE consumption will come down, and you can actually use the specific table. Okay, this is a hypothetical 30-bed COVID-19 ward and a 30-bed COVID-19 ICU. What will be the hand rub as per the calculation? So you can use this as a tool to calculate and indent for your PPE on a monthly basis. Yeah. Now, talking about negative pressure isolation rooms, I told you that engineering controls, okay, especially if you have a COVID-19 positive case, highly infective case, it is always better to put the particular patient in a negative pressure isolation room. So when I say, okay, admit the patient, put him in the isolation room, it's negative pressure, no, sister? Yeah, fine. No, you cannot leave it at that. You have to actually call the maintenance person, the team, ask them to check whether there's a pressure differential of 2.5 pascals. Ask them to show how they're testing or checking for the pressure with a Magnehelic meter, right? You have to tell them to record the airflow volume differential, record the relative the temperature and the relative humidity, and also show you what is the number of air changes per hour. Please remember, air changes per hour is a very, very important parameter when you talk about air engineering to prevent transmission of respiratory illnesses. Okay, in a general ward, in a general COVID-19 ward, okay, with the good ventilation, or a single room without negative pressure, okay, the minimum number of air changes per hour should be 6. 6 air changes per hour should be the minimum requirement. And in an isolation room, right, with the negative pressure, the minimum requirement should be 12 air changes per hour. Now, why? You can ask me, why do we require these air changes? Because it has been found that every one air change, okay, in 1 hour can decrease the number of aerosols, the infectious aerosols, by 63%, right? And after 5 air changes per hour, okay, in an hour, the less than 1% of aerosol or airborne viruses are actually found in the room. So this is the way in which ventilation and air changes per hour actually help in decreasing the risk of transmission. Right. The other things in a negative pressure isolation room are the presence of an anteroom, wherein you will have to have a hand wash facilities for discard and disposal of used PPE, alcohol-based hand rubs, etc. So these are the things which you should need to audit in an isolation room, which is negative pressure. An important signage on the front of the door of the isolation in the anteroom itself, as well as in your COVID-19 dedicated areas, specifically pictorially depicting what are the PPEs and what are the precautions which people need to take before entering that particular area, right? Then environmental controls, I think I already talked to you about this. These are some specificities as to what should be the distance between the beds, okay, and the air changes per hour. Next slide, right? And we have ICUs again. Okay, here again, specific recommendations for ICUs. What should be the bed spacing? Here, the bed spacing will be much higher than when you talk about a general cohort ward. It will be 3 meters or more to allow ease of movement and lot of equipment in that particular area. And there is also an OT guidelines which talks to you about the engineering controls. Up to 24 air changes per hour should be there. Okay, in an OT normally itself, and especially when you're intubating a patient. Okay, you're putting doing any aerosol generating procedures, then you need to have a higher rate of air changes per hour. Yeah. Now, there are some special areas which I included in the last minute because there will definitely be a large number of aerosol generating procedures and a high risk of transmission in some specific areas in the healthcare. Okay, these are radiology, laboratory, and dental units or dental clinics. Okay, if you talk about radiology, this is a beautiful way in which, you know, the important points to prevent transmission of infections in radiology is reconfiguration of the radiology department. So this slide, okay, basically tells you, this particular diagram tells you how in a particular radiology department of a healthcare, they have directed the patients, okay, and streamlined them and identified contaminated areas and non-contaminated areas. So beautiful. This can be actually used as a tool to look at how your own radiology unit functions. Okay. The other important points are minimizing contact time, okay, for the digital radiography and CT. Okay, disinfection of floors and equipment every 3 to 4 times a day. Surface disinfection of equipment after every patient has to be done. Okay, the cassettes, the patient care tables, all these examination tables, all these needs to be cleaned and disinfected with EPA approved disinfectants. Okay, commonly used are chlorine disinfectants. Minimum ppm should be 1000 ppm, or you can use 70% alcohol wipes. Okay, air disinfection is very important in interventional radiology units. Okay, because there could be some amount of aerosol generation in such units, and if there is an aerosol generating procedure which has been practiced in these interventional radiology units or suites, then you need to fog. Okay, keep it closed for 30 minutes. And if you cannot do a fogging or a terminal disinfection and leave it closed for 30 minutes, you can also place portable HEPA filters, okay, in these units and let it run for around 1 hour before you take the next patient. So preferably you will post such patients, very sick patients, as the last case, so that you can address these contamination issues. Okay. The other important thing is HEPA filter equipment cannot be placed in MRI rooms. Okay, because both of them are not compatible. Right. So this is another example of how portable radiology practices can be done in a COVID isolation room. Okay, it's a beautiful slide. Please go through it in detail. It gives you the steps as to how, without even opening the IR room, you can actually take the portable. You can take the X-ray through the glass of the isolation. Okay, please go through it in detail later. Because of the lack of time, I'm rushing through a little bit. Yeah. Coming to lab, so these are some basic things in laboratory. Appropriate personal protective equipment. You cannot expect lab technicians to wear the full sleeved thing with boot covers and all that. So obviously a good protective coat with the goggles is a must. Okay, eye protection is a must, and of course closed footwear. These are things which we commonly miss out in labs. So this has to be implemented definitely, okay, in the lab. And of course biomedical waste, not to drink and eat anything, no cosmetic allowance, okay, in the lab. Now when you talk about consideration during sample collection, I've already talked to you about, you have to ensure that the phlebotomist or the person who's collecting the sample, especially the swabs, wears an N95 mask. Okay, how he decontaminates after every patient. Okay, you have to give them 70% alcohol separately for disinfecting the horizontal surfaces after collection of swabs. Okay, collection of sputum samples should not be done in the lab. It should be done in an open, well ventilated area. Okay, and the technician should wear the appropriate N95 mask while if he is there to induce sputum collection, right? Reuse of tourniquets not advisable at all. It is better to use disposable tourniquets available already in practice. Okay, sanitize your phlebotomy chairs after every patient and decontaminate the phlebotomy room at the end of the day. Do a terminal cleaning and decontaminate it. Right. These are specific consideration during processing of samples in the laboratory. Okay, you can use, important thing is the external disinfection of containers which you get sample collected containers. You have to disinfect them with 1% sodium hypochlorite. Okay, if you're using an autoanalyzer, okay, you should not be opening the cap. Okay, wherever possible, avoid opening the cap. And if you're dealing with respiratory fluid cytology samples, please open such samples in a validated biosafety cabinet of class 2 and above. Okay, and if you are running confirmed samples or COVID-19 positive confirmed samples in a machine, you can actually run 2 tubes of 1% sodium hypochlorite solution at the end of the day. This will help in machine decontamination. Okay, all sample tubes have to be autoclaved after you test them or process them for different tests. Okay, and lab definitely requires a higher frequency of decontaminating surfaces and floor mopping. That has to be at a higher frequency of at least 3 to 4 times a day, right? Either with chlorine, that is 1000 ppm, or you can use 70% alcohol or even hydrogen peroxide wipes. Okay, now the other important thing is the dental units. This is again extremely important because dental units have unique characteristics, okay, that warrant in additional infection control. Okay, this is a beautiful diagrammatic representation of how dental practice drilling, okay, will actually help in release of large number of droplets, okay, and aerosols, and this can infect the patient, the doctor, the dental hygienist or the dental assistant, and in turn this can also affect the other patients who are waiting for their appointments. Okay, so important is postpone elective procedures, take in only emergency dental procedures, implement source control. Okay, as soon as the patient comes in, ensure that they wear a surgical mask for not only the patient, also the dental assistants as well as the doctors. Actively screen everyone by thermal screening, and actively screen your dental hygienists and your assistants before every shift, right? The PPE which should be worn by the dentist when they are doing any dental procedures like drilling and all should be N95 mask with a face shield. This is very important. Of course, full sleeved PPE gown, okay, has to also be worn. Now, the engineering controls in dental are usually avoidance of dental handpieces, use of dental handpieces and air water syringe, and also ultrasonic scalers. Also use more of a four-handed dentistry, okay, and use high evacuation suction and dental dams to minimize droplet spatter and aerosols. Okay, infection control considerations are surgical face mask, not cloth mask. Surgical face mask has to be worn by everybody who's entering the dental clinic, whoever's assisting or helping in whatever position, right? And job specific training should be given to the dental assistants on the wearing of PPE, how not to contaminate their PPE, and autoclave hand pieces after every patient, right? Also have the patients rinse with 1% hydrogen peroxide solution before every appointment, each and every appointment, and clean and disinfect patient care areas and equipment after each and every patient procedure. So these are some of the simple, basic fundamental practices for prevention of infections, risk of transmission in dental units. Okay, the next and the last poll question is disinfection spraying on public places and people recommended, and is it useful? We are seeing a lot of it now, but is it recommended?
Okay, most of the people, I think, okay, let me wait for more response. 73, 30. Oh, surprisingly, it is coming to tie.
Okay, I know, because most of these poll questions are controversial questions. There's a lot of debate on it.
I think, okay. So at least it is settling between 54. Just wait for a minute more, a few seconds. Okay, I'm just closing the poll now, and the response is really, really interesting.
Okay.
47% say yes, 52% says no.
So the majority wins, right? Okay.
Marginal
right?
majority.
Marginal majority wins, right? But see, so this is an extremely debatable question. In fact, most of the apartments, they have started spraying people who are coming to work as domestic helps, who are coming as drivers, etc. This is not at all recommended. The recent guidelines by the WHO specifically advises against spraying of public places and spraying on people. They can be extremely harmful, okay, to all other creatures which are living and also to the people on whom you're spraying. Okay, so it is environmental spraying of buildings, roads, dwellings with chlorine is not recommended. There is no evidence of transmission from these areas, and spraying on individuals and groups is definitely not recommended because it is equally stigmatizing, right? It is not only harmful and causing, it can be ocular toxic, it can be toxic to the eyes, to the skin. People can be allergic to the chemicals which you're using, and it is extremely stigmatizing to spray anybody with a chemical before they enter a particular area. So it is definitely not recommended. Okay, right. Now the important thing about coming to the environmental disinfection, surface cleaning, we've already talked about it. You should do it, etc. Okay, we'll dwell a little bit on this in detail, because this is, as I told you, one of the major modes of transmission of SARS-CoV-2 has been found from inanimate objects and surfaces in patient care areas and also in community public areas. Okay, if you look at coronaviruses, they can remain infectious on surfaces varying from 24 hours to 9 days. Okay, so for each area of the healthcare, okay, has to be cleaned twice daily minimum. I'm not, even if it's a non-clinical area, administrative area, reception counter, whatever it is, it should be cleaned for a minimum of twice, 2 times with a proper schedule, a checklist, and a specific program has to be in place. This cleaning, which is being done by the housekeeping and the maintenance staff, has to be validated by the supervisors. Now, how do you do validation? You can either do a visual inspection, or you can also use, as I told you, some amount of technology, like you can use fluorescent markers. You can, actually, these are colorless, so you paint them and then you make the housekeeping actually clean that surface, and then with the help of a UV bulb, you can actually look at how the cleaning has been done, and you can show it to them. You can actually on spot show it that, see, this is how you have left behind areas. So this is a very important part of surface disinfection. And in high risk areas like COVID-19 dedicated areas, ICUs, you need to clean at least 3 to 4 times a day. Right. So this is again a beautiful table touching upon is a WHO interim guidelines in May of 2020, this month, which actually talks about what is the recommended frequency of cleaning of environmental surfaces as per the patient care areas with suspected or confirmed COVID-19. I'm not going to dwell on this slide. There is one important point here, which is called as high-touch surfaces, which I will be elaborating on the next slide. Okay. Right. What are high-touch surfaces? Why are we concentrating on high-touch surfaces when we talk about environmental sanitation and disinfection? These are inanimate surfaces around the patient care area, which are most commonly used by multiple people. And that is why they are called high-touch, very frequently used, and this has to have a special attention in cleaning and decontamination. Okay, right. Okay, now going on to the agents which are used in disinfection. This is another important thing. One is you have to have a program in place, right? You should know what are the agents you use. You should know how to train the housekeeping staff. You should know how to monitor and validate the housekeeping, job, right? And you should all teach them how to clean a particular place or a particular patient room. There's a technique of cleaning that also has to be put in an SOP, as in this diagram, how they have to clean, starting from where, ending from where, and what is the personal protective equipment which the cleaning staff needs to wear. Okay, and of course, what are the EPA approved disinfectants, right? This is extremely important. This again is a table of disinfection of medical equipment, just an example of a table. You can have your own SOP as a tool. This is just a guidance tool as to how you need to enlist all the items and have what are the agents which you need to use, how you should clean, and what is the procedure, right? These are some of the tools which you can use for environmental disinfection and decontamination, right? So housekeeping surfaces, the major thing which we need to a little bit concentrate on are utensils. There's a big thing. They say, no, you should, how do we handle utensils which are, handled by COVID-19 positive cases? There is nothing specific, only standard precautions, but you need to wear gloves while handling the patient trays and dishes and utensils. That's it. There's no other PPE which is required by the catering staff. Yes, laundry and linen. Obviously, either if you have a washing machine, you can wash at 60 to 90 degrees, okay, with the detergent, followed by a soak cycle in which you can add 0.1% chlorine, that is a minimum of 1000 ppm, and let it soak for a holding time of 30 minutes and dry it. If there is no washing machine, then you can do it manually with soap water, hot soap and detergent, and use chlorine. Right. Now, coming to risk assessment of healthcare workers, it's very important for you all to note that I told you in the beginning, surveillance of healthcare workers is extremely important because we're working in this pandemic situation. So this is again guidelines which tell you as to what this is basically a risk classification of your healthcare workers. Okay, this is a table which is a risk classification table for asymptomatic healthcare personnel following exposure to patients with COVID-19. Okay, or their exposure to patient or patient secretion. So based on what sort of risk factors, what is the exposure category. Okay, it actually gives you recommendations as to how you need to monitor them, whether they need an active monitoring, whether they have to do a self monitoring, and whether you need to quarantine them from work. Okay, all these recommendations are given in these tables. Right, same thing here. Okay, this is prolonged close contact with the patient, okay, with COVID-19 who was not wearing a so if the patient was wearing a PPE, that was the previous slide. If the patient, there is no source control for the patient was not wearing any sort of surgical mask, there was no source control, and the healthcare worker has been exposed to such a patient, what are the recommendations? Yes, these are community measures. I will not talk too much about it. We all know about this. The scope of community measures includes individuals and families at home, travel associated community measures, contact tracing, contact community measures, and community measures for high risk individuals living in the public. Okay, the measures mainly are social distancing and all those. This is just some of the diagrams which display of depiction of what are the measures in the community which has happened, right, and which is taking place still. And of course, respiratory hygiene is extremely important for us to educate the community on. Okay, so this is again which we can do by posters and videos. Right, quarantine, of course, you have institutional and home quarantine again as a community measure, and it's important that you try to do more of telemedicine and teleconsults from your healthcare, and also establish good rehabilitation programs for your patients who are quarantined, because they require both physical as well as psychological support. Right, these are specific community-based measures, okay, based on the transmission, again, as I told you, based on the COVID-19 transmission in that particular locality. So if there's very low community transmission, minimal to moderate community transmission, as there's substantial community transmission, what are the activities, or what are the precautions each of them in the community should be doing, right? Okay, this is travel associated community measures again. Okay, basically looking at people who have traveled from a country with high rate of transmission. Okay, and what are the recommendations or precautions which they need to do, what is the number of days of quarantine, and whether they have to do a self monitoring, whether they have to what are the other precautions which they need to employ. Right, and these are again for asymptomatic patients who are looking after COVID-19 patients at home. Right, what are the recommended precautions for the contacts of these patients? So this again is a beautiful table which can be used as a tool when you're talking about education to such specific groups in the community. Right, high risk individuals in the community, first of all, they should identify, we should be able to identify, the public should be able to identify and self monitor as to whether they are high risk or not, and what are the important measures which they need to employ. Right, so this is again the high risk individuals in the community and the precautions which they need to follow. Okay, especially in the when we're talking about especially geriatric population and patients who are immunosuppressed with chronic lung disease or diabetes. Right, so this is something which we need to keep in mind. Right, so to summarize, IPC practices and tools in healthcare and community consists of practices and tools. Right, practices are early recognition, assessment, triaging, standard precautions with transmission-based precautions, barrier nursing, isolation protocols, social distancing, and quarantine. All these are practices. The tools which we can use or employ to ensure that these practices are in place are administrative tools, educational tools, monitoring tools, infrastructure and engineering tools, and resources. So these are this is a nutshell of what I have been speaking about. Right. So that's it. So if any other questions are there or any other queries are there, please feel to interact.
Yeah, there are a few questions. I will just.
Yes, Dr. Sukanya, thank you very much for a very comprehensive presentation.
I'm sorry that I've exceeded the time limit.
I know, and I could not actually dare to stop, because otherwise, the audience probably would aim their anger at me if I stop. So it was very, very comprehensive, very interesting presentation, and I think it is need of the hour to give those practices and the tools which are really required for us to restart the engine, right? Because most of the hospitals, till yesterday, till last week, had been closed, and slowly, they are coming into functioning. And most of our colleagues who had been working in the hospitals, they were looking forward to not only have the basics of epidemiology, understanding of the various tools of epidemiology, but also to understand the practical tools in order to implement them at the practice. I think you have done a full justice to the theme.
I hope so.
Talking about IPC from community to ICU, I think you have done a full circle of it, and very interesting is a very comprehensive kind of drill down on the tools, starting from administrative to educational to monitoring and engineering. I think for 1.5 hour lecture, I think it is more than good, right? So at the same time, I think you have also given some of the ready reckoners, which probably you could not dwell into the detail. I am sure we will be pardoned for that by the participants, and I'm sure they can actually go back to this presentation, which would be provided to them both in the form of PDF and also in the form of video recording. You can go through that and take those ready reckoners in order to make good use of them. I especially liked actually some of the stress which is given on the basics again. The basics are standard precaution, right? Especially your emphasis on hand hygiene and also the adequate use of PPE. I think it is the need of the hour, because however resourceful or however a high resource is the hospital, but prudent use of the PPE and a proper hand hygiene is going to go a long way in containing the current pandemic, but also it will give us a good kind of basis going ahead and implementing the standard precautions in our day-to-day life, even post-COVID, right? COVID-19 as a pandemic looks like it is not going to end soon, and instead of actually getting flustered about it, I think we should use this opportunity in order to propagate those basic standards and basic protocols and basic practices which we had to implement in our healthcare setting, so that we can truly make our care as a safer care. With those few words, now I hand over to Mr. Pranav, so that he can actually at least try and actually pull out some of those questions. I see there are 30-40 questions, but if you can pull out some of the interesting questions, maybe we can take 3 to 5 questions, and then we can answer the rest of the questions in an offline mode.
Definitely.
Pranav, can you go ahead, please?
Yeah, so we have multiple questions. So I just picked a few questions from a different diverse area. Some of the questions already got responded by Dr. Sukanya. So I am not putting that question. So let me take with Dr. Vashanta. She's asking how many hours to be used N95 mask?
So we can, if you're continuously or intermittently using, you can use up to 8 hours.
8 hours. Meenakshi asks PPE for common people who cannot buy expensive masks. Whether
The public?
Yeah, people, common people, yes.
So basically, see, there are 2 recommendations. One is the cloth masks, and then is the surgical masks. Now, the cloth mask does not have any filtration efficacy at all. It doesn't have any function of filtration at all. It only provides a mechanical barrier. So if if you're looking at preventing yourselves, if you're living in a community which has got a large number of COVID or even moderate number of COVID transmission going on, then it is always better to wear a surgical mask, right? If you're in a green zone where you really don't have much of too many people in the community having an ongoing COVID transmission, then just for a mechanical barrier, a cloth mask is sufficient. But ideally, a surgical mask is the one which it should be worn for filtration.
So Dr. Manoranjan Mahapatra, he asks that in community, can somebody reuse surgical mask after washing?
No, surgical masks cannot be washed and reused because they are single-use disposable masks. You can, if you're using in a public, in the community, you will definitely not be using these surgical masks for prolonged periods of time, as in contrast to healthcare, right? You will be using it probably when you go to the supermarket or to buy your provisions, or you go down for walking, which is only maybe maximum for 1 or 2 hours, right? So you can always store those surgical masks, okay, in a dry brown paper, and you can reuse it for another 2 or 3 times. So basically for 6 hours intermittently, 4 to 6 hours, and after which you need to dispose it off. But washing will damage those layers of the surgical mask, because you have an electrostatic layer, you have a which acts as a filter, and you also have another breathable layer, and all these layers will get damaged during washing.
Okay, and I will take last question because we are already delayed. What are the ideal disinfection practices to be used in clinic or hospital premises? I think this is a very elaborate
I
question
have already covered. Yeah, I've
about this.
already covered. See, when you talk about disinfection, you have to talk about disinfection of surfaces, equipment, right? And even air. So when you talk about all these things, I think the slides actually have a lot of information. The basic principles of disinfection basically are frequency of disinfection, the process by which you do a disinfection, validation of it, training on disinfection, and the disinfectants which you use. Right? You cannot use chlorine as a universal disinfectant across all areas because chlorine is corrosive. So you need to define in different areas which have specialized equipment. You can use only hydrogen peroxide or alcohol. So there is a lot of, it's a loaded question, and the slides are loaded with a lot of information, so you can actually go through it. If there's anything else which you really specifically need to clarify, please feel free to communicate.
So yeah,
Yes.
please.
You wanted to say something?
No, that's you have to go. Some more slides are there, 2-3 slides.
Okay, fine.
Announcements, yeah.
Yeah, once again, thank you very much, Dr. Sukanya, for a wonderful presentation. I think, regarding the disinfection, probably the next series we will try and cover. But as Dr. Sukanya has said, it is a very elaborate topic, which we can talk for another 10 sessions, probably, making it as a big series. But there are a couple of, very basic things which we always have to remember is that, contact time, concentration, these are the two things, we have to always remember when we are talking about disinfection or even antisepsis. Okay. With those few words, once again, I thank Dr. Sukanya for finding time from her very busy schedule to participate in this event. And today we are closing with this 5 webinar series. I think, thank you very much for all the participants, your active participation, and also very positive feedback has enabled us to really, go into the detail and also, bring the kind of speakers who are authority in the given area. And we will continue to do that. And I request, in order to make our endeavor and make our efforts even more fruitful, even more useful for the healthcare community, we request actually to come back not only with the feedback on your perceptions about all the 5 sessions, but also recommend some of those topics which are required for you in your healthcare setting. That will enable us to design our further web series or web programs, which we are going to offer, in a continuous mode. So on the slide, on your screen, you can see www.sanmed.live/topics. That is where you can go and give your recommendations or the suggestions in regard to the future sessions, right? We will definitely consider them, and because the whole endeavor is to bring the practical aspects in relation to implementation of infection prevention and control practices within the healthcare system. And hence your feedback is going to be very valuable in designing these programs. And I once again thank Sanmed Healthcare for a very generous academic grant, which has enabled us to bring this 5-session series for you. And I'm sure their representatives would be contacting you for more information, which you probably would need, or to help you with any of the questions related to the web series, either present or the future one. And as I told you that soon we are going to come. I think, we probably would give a gap of 1 more week, because we don't want to tire you with every Tuesday with one webinar. So with a break of 1 week, we will be coming back with next series, which is going to be on the biosafety. As we all know, as healthcare professionals, infection preventionists, and also the public health specialists, how relevant is in today's scenario the biosafety within the healthcare system, right? Either it is the transportation of the samples or handling of the samples, or very many aspects, which are related to the biological safety, are very much desired by many people, many professionals, who want to get those tools and practices so that they can make their healthcare settings safer. So this series on biosafety is conceived with the help of the advisors like Dr. T.V. Rao, who is a former professor and HOD Department of Microbiology at TMC, and Dr. Ranganathan Iyer, who is a consultant microbiologist with Global Hospitals Hyderabad, and he is also one of the leaders with HISI. And myself, Dr. Rangareddy, as you all know. So I am very glad that we could conclude this whole series with such a high note and with a very comprehensive presentation by Dr. Sukanya. And please do not forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel. Again, on your screen you would see www.sanmed.live/YT. You would be able to get all the videos of the past sessions, and also some more interesting videos which are not part of this web series but also are going to be posted there. Please ensure that you are going to subscribe and support this. Thank you very much, and have a great time. Have a safe time for you and for your families. We wish that you are going to come out of this COVID-19 situation successfully and without getting any hurt. Thank you very much. Bye-bye. Mr. Pranab.